There.
Right. So here it is.
Okay, so go to your course wherever
Mm.
the table of contents.
Okay, so
Or
there's
click on
nothing in the
content.
table of contents yet. So I'll click on that arrow. No, this is widget. Or click on
Yeah,
content,
go
you
to
said.
content. And you can always put it in a folder and then remove it and delete it. So,
Okay,
or you can, I think you can
yeah,
put it.
I can add a module.
add a
I'll just
module.
call it
Call it
Perusall.
perusal. In fact,
Yeah.
that's probably the best practice, because one of the differences between perusal and hypothesis is with hypothesis, you can put a content or a hypothesis assignment anywhere in the course where you have content, and all the work is done within the course. With Perusal, what happens is you move to their platform. So you want to create a folder for Perusal as a standalone module, because students would have to enter that to do any of the work, as they would with some publisher content. So, so go into your Perusal content folder, and then click on existing activities and choose external learning tools. And one of the external learning tools will be Perusal.
Oh, good.
And then you just need to set it up. And to set it up, you just click on it. And you already have an account. If this is your first time using Perusal, it will tell you you need to create an account with this email address.
All right.
So
I'll just
if
stop
you
that
already
share
have an
and
account,
go into that.
you have to go into your email and confirm that this is in fact you doing it, and it's not someone else, you know, in your course. So if anyone else that does this, it will ask you to create the account, and you can do it right at the same time when you set it up. But you have to give them, you know, your basically your name and email address. I don't think it asks for much more. Well, an institution.
All right, so I've done that. Now let me try again to open this, and then if it works, I'll share it again. Okay, it is here.
Sure.
So do you want me to keep sharing this?
Yeah, if you could, just to show the steps of setting it up. And you should be able to refresh, I think, and get rid of that.
Oh, is that is not what I'm seeing. Interesting.
Huh.
Let's see, maybe I was sharing the wrong tab. Let me try to share the tab that I want. This one. This one.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, that's right, because now it's opened and now you're working on the Perusal website. So it looks sort of similar to, well, actually it doesn't, but this is basically what students will see whenever they're in there, this sort of an interface. So what you would do basically is, oh, this is interesting. Links in your LMS for students to access Perusal. Oh, so you have to define the course, and I had already done that. So yeah, so you choose your department and set up the course just so students know. So you'd have, you know, this is good because I had done this a while ago, so I had forgotten about this part.
What day do they end? It ends sometime in May.
Yeah, late May.
May, let's say the 12th. I think that's the end of exam.
That's probably
week.
right.
All right.
And then the question is, you can have either automatic grading with their built-in rubric or rubrics that you edit, or you could do manual grading, or you could just not grade it at all and just look at the engagement analytics. So it does a lot of this automatically, which is something that that hypothesis doesn't do.
I really like the automatic grading, even though I ended up needing to adjust it substantially last time because sometimes it was asking for a bit much. It at least gives me a baseline and saves a lot of time.
And I think you can edit that too. So, so yeah, you can leave it at the automatic grading and engagement analytics. You give it your estimated enrollment, and it does. It's asking out mostly in case you want to do groups within.
Yeah, no, I'll just do one big group of everyone.
And then save changes, and then you're right there. So the first thing you would do in doing this is upload things to the library. And actually, I can take over here because I do have this one set up now.
Okay, good. Yeah, I do have a question. Is there a way for students to upload things? I'd love for
yes, and I haven't done that yet, but there is.
Okay, that would be great. That would save me a step of them finding an article if they could post it themselves.
Okay, now let me see. So this is the account. This I have put in the Celt account actually to let everyone play with it a little bit. So you can actually work in this account. I just uploaded 3 samples. So I'm going to go to content. I created this. I'll show you how to upload and add assignments. I haven't really gotten to the point of connecting it to the gradebook, but that should all be taken care of. I mean, it should be fairly automatic. So as an instructor, this is what you'd see when you'd connect. And it should just open, and there it goes. And the first thing you would do is you would upload the content you're going to use. And I believe you can have students upload it because that's a relatively new feature. It wasn't there, I think, a year ago. So what you would do first is you would create a library. You would add things to the library. So you'd open the library, and basically these are the things that I have here. And in the library, well, you'd click on this library tab, and then you would just simply choose add content. And and here is a student upload folder. So you could create a student upload. You could create multiple student upload folders where students could upload their content, PDFs or other PDF.
So you created that folder? That folder was
no, that is there by default. Well, it's there by default when you go to add content, I believe.
Oh, when you click on add content. Let's see.
So if you click on add content, that's how you put
student upload folder. I see. You add a student upload folder and then the student.
Yes.
Okay.
So you click on it and you give it a name, and it will give a folder that students can upload their work to. And when you click on add content, these are the options you get. Now, Perusall is free. It doesn't cost a college anything or SUNY anything because it's actually funded through the publishers that sell their books through this. So if you wanted to, you could buy your book through Perusall. Students would purchase it at whatever the digital price normally is, and then Perusall gets a cut just like bookstores do if they sell access codes and so forth. But you can also, and this is probably the more common use for many of us, you could take a website that has text that is machine readable. You can't do it with images. It won't bring images in. It won't bring in scanned images if they're just, an image scan unless there's a text layer. You could upload PDFs, EPUBs, Word, or PowerPoints from Dropbox and make sure they're accessible, right, Casey? And you could also directly upload a document, and you could just go. I just downloaded one just to show how it would work. I just grabbed one. Where did it go? I thought I went to. I have it right here. Show in folder. Where did it go? Oh, it went to the desktop on this computer. Okay. I haven't been using this computer. There's a lot of stuff in there, but I'm looking for one that says space practice. I downloaded that article, and I'm going to click open, and it's going to read it in. And you will see the progress as it does. It takes a little bit of time because everything is hosted on the Perusall server, and they're probably fairly active right now at the start of the semester, which may explain why it takes a while for things to load. And it does say you can log off during this process. But basically, once you've put it in the library, it will do the upload and make it ready for you. And it will be back in a darker print once it's all done. And so you add all the content, any of the content you want to have students annotate, and making sure you have appropriate access to it and so forth. And for most of these, I do, maybe not this one. But the next thing you would do is you would create an assignment. And here are some assignments I put together. And apparently I still had one in from an earlier attempt. I don't see it here though, so I've got to figure out how to delete it in a way that makes it invisible for people logging in. But what happens now is if I'm going to add a new assignment, I will do that. And I can again, add assignment, there we go. And here you have 2 options. You could have an assignment which goes to everyone with one of the items from the course library, or you could have a differentiated assignment where you have different assignments for different groups of students. if you have students divided in some way with differentiated instruction, you could have some more advanced topics for some individuals to annotate, perhaps more basic ones for others if they're at a lower level. I know Rebecca, for example, teaches a course where she has students at many different levels, and could have students working in groups where you have more advanced students or graduate students do somewhat more elaborate work. Students who are at beginning level can work with some more basic readings or annotations. And so I'm just going to add an assignment, a simple one here, and then you assign content. And this would pull up all the stuff that's available in the library, including the student upload folder, if there was something in there, which there isn't. I'm going to grab the this final report on the meta-analysis of hybrid face-to-face and asynchronous instruction. It's got a lot of discussion. You could add selected pages. I'm going to add the whole thing, well, actually, no, I'm going to add the first 20 pages just for simplicity, because that's like a 90-page document. And then you go to the next step, where you add instructions and you put in a submission deadline. We'll make this due next year, just so I'll leave this open in case anyone wants to play with the assignment. So that'll be okay. I'm going to put in an assignment name, and this is a repeated assignment on meta-analysis of instructional modalities. And oops, and you don't need those extra letters, it turns out. And then read and comment on this. You'd probably want to put in more elaborate instructions for students. You might want to tell them how many annotations or what types of annotations and so forth. And I'm going to make this visible to students right now. There we go. And so it's going to be to either entire class, specific students, or the specific groups. This is going to be open to anyone in this group. And you could make it anonymous so that any comments would be anonymous, which is a good way of getting feedback, say on a course syllabus or something. If you want students to give you, feedback without worrying about that. It could be optional with no scoring, and you could choose not to remind students to complete this assignment. And I want to make sure I check this box because all faculty and many staff members are in this group. And otherwise, when that due date came up next year, everyone would be getting reminders that they needed to complete this assignment. And we get enough reminders about the various mandated training. So we're going to go to the next step. We're going to use the course scoring settings, which you can set in other places. And we can go to, I guess that's it. Or you could have custom scoring settings for some assignments that differ from your default ones. That we select save changes. And now this is the new assignment. And now you should all be able to enter in here and see what it looks like from a student perspective. And we can take a look at some of the other tools in just a little bit, but I'd encourage you to try it. One of the nice things about Perusall compared to Hypothesis and many other annotation tools is that most annotation tools are limited to just text or providing page comments on a given web address, which could be a video, but you're not able to annotate things within the item unless they're readable text. This will allow you to do videos, annotate videos by pausing in a video and leaving comments. It will allow you to do assignments. It will, somewhere in here, there's a podcast one. Well, maybe I deleted the wrong one, which is why one of them has expired. Okay. I don't know. I was messing around with it, and this was done really late last night or early this morning. So in any case, what you can do is just come in and try the videos. You could also do it with podcasts and audio, and it works in pretty much the same way as a video. I had 2 of these and I decided to change it and I messed up. But in any case, if you come in as a student, what will happen is you should be able to see it from a student view. I can show you what it looks like from a student view, which is, I think, there is a way of getting to the student view, right? Well, I guess that is it. Okay, never mind. No. Okay, anyone able to help me here? What is it? Where is the student view? I was on it last night.
John, I'm looking at
Oh.
it. Okay, somebody, you found it.
Right there. So it's going to log me in as a student, just so you can see what it looks like before your students actually start working with it. And apparently there's that video annotation sample, which expired, yesterday. Okay, which is, I meant to, you can still work on it, but it's after the deadline, which is why I put the other one in, because I could have changed the deadlines, but I was just messing with it a bit. So if you want to go into the video annotation sample, use the one that's not past due. As a student, you would just work on the assignment. It would give you a whole tour. The first time you do it, we're going to end the tour. And basically you just start playing the video. Welcome, Michelle Miller. And I am going to mute the video here because you would be hearing it too. But what happens is at any point in the video, you can just click on, if there's something you want to comment on, you just click add comment and you put a comment in and you type your comment here, sample comment. And then other people can comment on the comments that are there, see the comments that are there, and so forth. And you can add emojis, you could add some LaTeX. If you were doing something in a STEM field, you could embed LaTeX and get mathematical typing. You can get, integrals, and well, you can get full LaTeX capabilities. So you could do, mathematical equations in there. You could add an image as part of your response. You could put in a link to other resources. You could insert a video comment. You could record your own video response and embed it right at that point in the video. You could also remove formatting if you brought in something that was had some ugly formatting, and do all these other things as well. And you could make the comment anonymous. So if you want to make a comment that you didn't want other people to see who did it, you have the option of doing that, although that would not necessarily help your grades if it's being automatically scored, because the instructor, I don't think it would be gradable if the student chooses to make it anonymous. And basically then you could go back and, and play it a bit more, leave other comments, and you could jump around in the timeline a bit. Oh no, you can't jump around in the timeline a bit. But in any case, if you want students to be able to annotate podcasts or videos or other things that are, streaming, you can do that. It takes a while for them to load into Perusall, but once they're there, and you can use them over and over again for different applications. And again, you could just go and do something else while it's uploading and rendering in a format that allows the annotations to take place. So I would suggest just trying it, playing with it just a little bit, because it's a nice feature. And then I'm going to sign out as a test student, which will put me back in the instructor view. There we go. Ooh, apparently that logged me out fully. I wanted to log out as a student, but I didn't want to log out as, I'm sorry. I don't know it that well. I've been using Hypothesis for years, and this was something I wanted to learn, and I thought I had learned it a little bit better, but you can easily get back in. There is a way of exiting the student view, but not that way. Well, that works, but it's kind of a brute force method. Now, there's other things you can do. You could duplicate an assignment. If you want to extend the deadlines, you can go in for any of the assignments that you have and expand the deadlines for individual students. So if you have students who need an extension, you can do that. Adding a deadline override for them. You could delete content. Oh, okay. You could edit any of the assignments. You could observe analytics for who's been the video annotation, and we don't have a lot there, but we can choose the grade distribution, the submission time heat map to see when the work's coming in. You could generate a student submission report. And we had 3 people come in and spend 0 time on this particular assignment, which is not much of a surprise because we haven't really talked about it except in this workshop. And to grade the assignment, you could set up the criteria and you could assign the grades here. And these are the default settings that basically 60% of the grade is based on annotation comment. The opening assignment is where they get some point of the grade. 20% of the score is just based on opening it. Reading it all the way to the end is another 20%, and the minutes of active time. And you notice this adds up to a lot more than 100%, but it caps out at 100%. So it gives people multiple ways of having their participation measured. Could be just partly by reading all of it, partly based on the number of comments, partly by whether they posted a comment that other people connected to, the amount of time that students spend in the activity before the deadline, whether they upvote other people's responses and so forth. All those things can add to the score up to a maximum of 100%. And you can set that up to be pretty flexible. There's a fair amount of flexibility there. And if you want to, in the gradebook, I think is where, if I remember correctly, you can, so you can see we have a lot of people in here. These are people who at least connected and tried the assignment or looked at it at some point. And we're not going to release any grades to anybody. Okay. Let's go back. Course home. Maybe it's in setting. I'm looking for how you change the grading. Zoe, do you remember where you changed the grading? I should
change it in what way? You mean override the
to
grades?
change the criteria, the weights.
Oh, let me see. I'll look, but I don't remember offhand.
Oh, maybe it's underscoring. Yeah, so you could choose set custom scoring options. And here it tells you the number of points, the range of scores you can give, the threshold scores for credit. So it could be either 0 or 1. So it's sort of like specifications grading. They either get credit or they don't if you choose that option. And here is where you can change the weights for the different components. So you could use additional settings by adding more, or you could go in and change a weight given to any one of those criteria by bumping some of them up, bumping some of them down. If one of those criteria is something you don't want to use, you can always set the weight on that at 0. If you only want to use one of the criteria, you could set that at 100 and bump everything else down to 0, for example. Or you could just use the defaults.
Can you look at the options for the annotation content? Because that's where I found it could get pretty picky if you scroll down a tiny bit under options.
Okay.
Like it wanted them to put 7 posts, which sometimes felt like a lot, at least for the kind of material I was having them read.
Yeah, so you could change that to 3 or 4 or 5, or 2 or whatever you want, whatever you think is appropriate for that specific assignment. And then you could choose to allow or not allow late annotations. But you notice the total score here is 60, 80, 100, 110, 130, 150, 170. So they could miss this whole thing and still get 100%. So, so they could get most of the points if they submit 7 high quality comments. So it's pretty easy for students to do well if they do at least a few of these things. Actually, any 4 of them would give them full credit if they meet the criteria on any 4.
I had a student last year who experimented with just copying random paragraphs to see how that would go, like from some unrelated document, but I am curious about how these annotation contents will interact with ChatGPT if there's no way to see that
Right.
it's real or not.
That's a really good point. And one way to do that is to try it and just see if it rates them as high quality. Because, you know, my impression of ChatGPT, I know some people say it sounds really artificial. The responses that I've been getting from it, just experimenting with it for the last couple of weeks, is better than most of what I get from most of my students, you know. So with many questions, it won't do many other types of things, but, you know, if you use well-defined, if you use some good prompts, you can get some moderately well-written responses, which is, you know, fairly high quality student work, at least B quality student work, if not higher in many cases. So I suspect, you know, ChatGPT could do pretty well on here by feeding it appropriate prompts. But again, I don't think that's as likely here, you know, than as it would be with other types of
Right.
writing.
It's not really worth it, I think.
It's not worth it because you're commenting on some specific sentence or paragraph or argument, and you're right in the document. It's probably much easier just to put your own thoughts there than it would be to open up a browser, go to that, type in some prompt that might give you something that's relevant to comment on it, but it's probably not going to give you a very relevant response much of the time. So it's probably easier just to do this yourself, I think. But it just as an issue of what it means by high quality, it might be interesting to experiment with that a little bit. And I'm sure it's defined somewhere in here.
Yeah, I wonder if you can adjust that at all. I found it really prioritizes length, like a very thoughtful but short comment is never going to be considered that high quality.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how it does it, but length is certainly one of them. It's probably the length of sentence structure, and, you know, simple things like that. Although I could see this starting to use AI to evaluate the arguments a bit more fully. You know, AI works on both sides. It works with grading as well as with content creation. So this is basically it. It's a really nice tool. Its main advantages as compared to Hypothesis, which is the other tool that I think more people have been using, is that it works with more types of content, audio and video content specifically, and it does a lot of the grading manually. Hypothesis has the advantage of being embedded right within the LMS. It's not in a separate instance apart from the LMS, but it doesn't really work very well if you're dealing with video or audio streams. And, you know, a lot of us do use some assignments where students watch short video clips or where they might listen to a podcast. So for those applications, I think Perusall would be much better. And the auto grading allows us to scale to large classes in ways that Hypothesis really couldn't, because the grading you do in Hypothesis is generally manual.
I think even for small classes, the auto grading is helpful in getting more nuance in the grading versus if I were grading, you know, hundreds of comments each week, even in a class of 12, I'm mostly going to just look for completion and like reasonable effort. I won't get as fine details of how much effort they put in as Perusall does.
It does a lot of the work for you, just in summarizing how much work students put into it. And that's a really strong advantage.
What is the active engagement time? Like, how does it calculate that?
That's a good question. My guess, well, let's look at the options. It's the number of minutes actively engaged. Now, what I'm assuming is active engagement must mean that they periodically move the cursor scrolling through the document, or they are typing something periodically. You know, just sitting, looking at a page while they're on, you know, while they're watching something in another window or while they're watching Netflix or something, probably, I would hope, would not be considered active engagement. I think it has to involve somehow interacting with the text, such as reading through the document to the end. So it's basically the amount of time they spend reading and providing feedback and so forth. But there has to be something for some motion sensing on the computer, I would imagine.
And I'm guessing the reading to the end, it's the same thing as listening to the end or watching to the end of a podcast or a video.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
For audio files or video files, I think the document there would be, the reading to the end would be playing the whole item.
And so we're looking at these at the assignment level, but is there a course level place to change all of these settings, the defaults?
That's a good question. We'll take a look at that in just a second. One other thing we should note is there is also a holistic approach. Oh, these are these are, I'm sorry, these are presets. So you can get different weights based on, so if you only want to focus on the content, these are weights that it changes by default, assigned. So 100% is on the content. If your focus is that they do the reading or watching, you could adjust the weights this way. So there's some preset ones, or you can manually do it. But so the question though is not this. This is how you do it for individual assignments. So we're going to cancel out of here. And I think that would be, if I remember, is that in the settings? I played with this last night or early this morning, and honestly, I don't remember where it was. Where are the settings? Oops. I'm going to wait for it to become responsive. There has to be a default for these that you can adjust. And my recollection is there was, and it came up. I'm going to wait for it to be responsive. Well, while we're waiting for that to go, it seems not to be responding. But one thing you could always do is, if there's a given type of assignment, assuming you can't change the defaults other than using one of the presets, you could always create an assignment and customize the evaluation, and then copy it for every other assignment that you're using, and just replace the specific reading or viewing with that. So it would give you at least a template that you could use, but I'm pretty sure there is a way of.
Oh, I found it. You were right. It is in settings. It was just at the bottom. You had to scroll down.
Okay.
Or settings and then scoring, but then at the bottom of the scoring section.
For me, it's just not loading. So settings. And I'm still getting that. Well, I'm going to exit the page and go back to here and try that again. And maybe a fresh start will do it. Okay, so now settings. It is going to the settings page. Well, in any case, that's where you would make the settings if it was responding. And for some reason, it is not responding here. It worked fine for me around 1 or 2 o'clock this morning when I was playing with it. So that's it. You know, the confusion reports tells you what sections of a document students were getting confused by, where they'd spend more time and provide more feedback. And that might be nice if you were creating some of the documents yourself, if you created some text lectures, for example, or if, you know, if there was a video where students were pausing a lot. But it's very easy to install. It's very easy to use. one thing that is a little bit inconsistent with the general philosophy of Brightspace, but it's something that most students and most faculty are used to from Blackboard or others, is that in Brightspace, the usual type of design principle is that students progress sequentially from one activity to another within course modules. Here, basically, you have to direct them back to Perusall for any Perusall assignments, no matter where they are within the course, because all the work is done within Perusall and outside of Brightspace. The grades will be transferred back into the gradebook, but they will not be, but for students, they'd have to leave where they were in Brightspace and jump to this page, to the Perusall page or the Perusall module every time they're doing a Perusall assignment, which is fine, and you can put in a shortcut to it. So it will probably appear more as if it is just a linear flow, as is a typical path or the preferred path in building Brightspace courses. And because it's integrated with Brightspace, the gradebook's already connected. Students are already connected. When students add or drop the course, they automatically get added or removed from the Perusall group, and it works. Other than the extremely long delay I'm experiencing here, which again I was not experiencing this morning, it seems to work fine. Any questions? Oh, there's some comments in chat. Can they see each other's comments? Yes, and they can. Yes, I believe they can reply back. You do need to submit comments, and Kristen had said left panel right before I noticed it over there, but my left panel seems not to be very responsive right now. Maybe something is cached there that's causing a problem. But yeah, so if we go back to the sample, maybe this will load. No, it's still trying to go back to the settings page and it's not. I don't know, but you can try it yourself. Try annotating other people's comments. And I'm pretty sure you do have that capability. So you've used this.
They can certainly respond to other people's comments as a whole. I don't know if they can highlight specific sections of the comment, but they're normally not that long anyway.
Right. So you can't annotate other people's comments, but you can reply to them.
And I think the default is they actually get emails every time someone responds to one of their comments. They at one point said they were overwhelmed by the emails they were getting constantly whenever someone responded to their thing on Perusall, but there must be a setting for them to disable that.
Assuming the settings is working. Actually, if someone's in there and would like to share their screen, I can stop sharing. And then because for whatever reason, I'm not able to get to the settings screen.
Which one do you want? The CELT one? Or
just to show the settings so that we could look at the options and perhaps how you
so not the CELT one, the structure one. Okay, yeah, I'll share that. 1 second. Okay, so here I'm in the settings under scoring, and there are various general options, but then you can set the weights for everything, just what we were looking at, but now at a general level. One thing I was wondering about is if there's a way to set multiple deadlines, like by this date, you should have made some comments, but then, a couple of days later, then go back and respond to other people's comments.
I did not see that as an option. Although there is those penalties that you could assign. With late annotations, you could assign, reduce scoring if I remember. But doing it where everyone has to make initial post by a certain date and then new post by another one, I didn't see an option for that. I think you'd have to do manual adjustments to it for that. But I may be wrong.
What do you want me to be looking at here?
What questions do people have about the automated scoring? Anyone?
It's interesting that the defaults here seem to be shorter than the ones you had. I don't know if you had lengthened yours or if they shortened them. Like, I didn't change this, but they earn full credit for 45 minutes and 4 annotations. And I was just thinking that the 7 and 90 minutes were too much for what I wanted them to look at.
Well,
But I
I
didn't
set
change
it
it.
up a while ago and I probably experimented with it a bit, but yeah, 4 is more reasonable than 7.
Mhm.
But it could also be the type of scoring. If you go up just a little bit, you do have the different. So there's a holistic ones and the annotation and the social
Mhm.
engagement and the focus on reading and watching. I don't know.
And then I guess
I had experimented with them, but
one thing I've never looked at is the quizzes that they have here. I don't know how to put a quiz in an assignment.
that's a relatively new feature that wasn't there, I think, the last time I looked at it, or I don't recall it being there. So that would that be? I was wondering about that, to be honest, myself. Maybe under the what's new it would tell you, or maybe
Mhm.
no. Okay.
Oh, there's more.
Okay.
I didn't use
it's
it in the fall, so who knows how long ago it might have been.
Yeah, well, there's something about quizzes right there. When you
Right, a
have
new
quiz.
question format. But that means the quizzes themselves must have existed.
But I didn't really
Wording.
even see the option of adding the quizzes. And it's got to be there somewhere. Maybe if you click on assignment, would that be?
If I click on assignment. Where am I clicking?
maybe the
Sorry, if I
course
go
home.
to the course home, whoops,
Yeah.
not here. No, go back.
Okay, because these are general across all of your courses. So within one of the courses we could see.
Okay, so.
So in there, try looking at
Assignments.
assignments just to see if there is.
Mhm. And so I'll add an assignment. I don't have any assignments yet. Let's see. I don't know if I actually want an assignment here. Add another part.
You can have parts, but the parts are drawn from the library, from what I've seen.
Mhm. So if I don't have any content in my library yet,
So yeah,
I don't know if
so-
anyone else has at a farther along stage who can do better at sharing this right now.
yeah, mine just doesn't seem to be working so well right now.
And oh no.
Yeah, I didn't actually see, and I did want to look up, I just didn't have time to see how you can add a quiz. I mean, you can always do a quiz in Brightspace, but
Click, Zoe, click on library. Add content, quiz,
I
right
see
there.
there is a quiz,
okay.
but that does it add, I guess, to a specific reading? Like we were seeing that as part of the scoring for something
I'm
that
reading,
already
I'm reading their
annotated?
help. Putting in the chat the help page that I'm looking at.
It would probably be just another part for the assignment. So if you put in the
Okay,
reading,
so you put it
maybe-
as a part. Oh, I see. So you'd have multiple parts and then one of
So
them
that
would
would
be a
just be-
quiz.
one of the parts for the assignment.
Okay.
Yep, looks like it.
Okay. And you've got a lot of choices there, whether they get partial or full credit and so forth.
Mhm.
Well, thank you for finding that, Casey.
Mhm.
And one nice thing is when you add content, if you're adding PDF, it does have a checker for digital rights. So it will tell you if you're violating copyright and so forth. And, you know, that's something that Hypothesis does not do. And it's probably a nice way of doing this. You know, if I was putting stuff up in my classes, I would want to make sure that they were free of copyright issues. I did throw in a couple of PDFs from research articles, you know, in the CELT account, which wasn't really a very good example because we don't quite have rights on those, although they do appear on the author's homepages. But the journals would probably object if they were being used. Okay, well, any other questions then? So obviously I haven't done too much with it, but it's a really powerful tool. And for many applications, it would be a really useful list. And then Casey posted, I think it was a Casey. After you click Save Changes, your quiz will appear in the library as a document. You can assign alone or as part of a multi-part assignment. So you can do quizzes right in here.
And I just want to comment, the students like it so much more than a discussion board, if that's the alternative you're considering, because they're engaging about more specific content instead of making sort of vague filler posts.
Yes, the same is true for Hypothesis. And students are more likely to do the reading when they have to do the comments within the reading. It's really hard to comment on the reading when you're actually commenting on specific words or sentences or paragraphs than it is when you were just asked to do a reading and then post something about it in the discussion board. You know, my experience is the quality of the comments are dramatically better when it's within the reading, and it actually appears as students have engaged with it and they find it much more useful and they spend much more time on it than they do in the readings based on what I've seen in the logs for discussion forums and so forth. So it's also a good way if you have students submitting work to get some peer feedback, you know, where they can annotate each other's work, which could be good in any number of classes. So, okay, well, play with it. If you have any questions, contact Zoe, or I try to answer them for you, because I do plan to learn it. I don't know if I'm going to be using this for my purpose. Hypothesis works pretty well, so I'll probably stay with this, but it is a tool I do plan to learn a bit about more. So, and it's used at many institutions. And I know at Vanderbilt, they were experimenting with both Hypothesis and Perusall, and the consensus was that people like Perusall a little bit more, mostly because of the flexibility and the types of documents it work with, and because of the automated grading that's built into it. And for many applications, that helps a lot. And certainly in larger classes, that's a really powerful feature. Okay, well, we'll stop the session then, and good luck. And I'll see some of you later today, the rest of you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.